And welcome to ETF Edge, your go-to place for everything exchange-traded funds. I'm your host, Bob Pisani. It may look like all the money's going into tech stocks, but that's not quite the case. There's very strong flows into some international markets and continuing strong flows in active ETFs here in the United States. Let's talk about that with Ben Slavin, Managing Director and Global Head of ETFs for BNY. Later in the show, I'm going to bring in my friend Kyla Scanlon, who has a fascinating new book out on financial markets. Ben, diversification still matters. We've got a rebalancing this Friday in the S&P I want to talk to you about, but I see money going into other parts of the world besides the United States. I see very strong inflows into India. Why India? What's going on there?
Well, we've seen investor sentiment turn positive on India. Just last week we saw over 450 million go into Indian ETFs, over 4 billion on the year. And certainly performance is a big part of it. Now we saw some hiccups certainly around the election, but India's rallied back, and there is this sentiment that, and a positive sentiment that investors are looking for future growth in India based on the prospects post-election. And again, the flows have started to follow.
And I also see nice inflows into broad European indexes. Why is that? Is this recent electoral chaos, particularly in France, we've been seeing, is that going to impact these flows?
Well, we'll see about that. I think that we have seen this trend start really this year, and certainly we've seen the last few months consecutively have seen inflows into European ETFs. Now, ECB recently cut by 25 basis points, obviously impacting markets, but also on the sentiment side, we've just seen a shift towards investors allocating more to Europe given valuations, but you really have to look at the impact of the dollar on those returns, depending on whether you want to be hedged or unhedged, because it's a very important driver of where things will go looking forward.
Yeah, this is what I tell people on international. The dollar really matters a lot. Currency plays can make a big difference in international investing. The yen's been weak against the dollar, as you mentioned here. The currency hedge Japan ETF, now look, this is up 22% year to date. That's way outperforming the S&P, but the largest Japan ETF is only up 3% on the year. That's not currency hedge. 22% versus 3%, and the difference is the currency, essentially.
That's exactly right. I mean, right there, it's really the strength of the dollar against the yen that's causing that performance differential. So that gap is all about the dollar and whether you have decided to hedge your dollar position or not. And again, you see that dichotomy there between those two ETFs. So very important to make that decision about how to allocate, especially as it comes to your views on the dollar. And ETFs have those different options available for investors to allocate one way or the other.
Obviously, this can go either way. If suddenly the yen was much stronger against the dollar, that would close a little bit. But I know you're not an investment advisor. Would it make sense if you want to know where things are, if you want to buy just into the stock market and not worry about currency, a currency hedged ETF would be the better way to go?
Well, certainly, again, we've seen both of these products in the market, and, be able to hedge that currency offers you an opportunity to say, look, I don't know where the currency is going. Therefore, it provides me with that opportunity just to simply hedge off that exposure and just focus on the equity returns.
I just want to move on. We were talking about tech. The S&P 500 is going to rebalance this week. The S&P 500 tech sector ETFs are seeing inflows in the past week, in the past month. That's certainly good. It's good to remind everyone that the ETFs do have limits on concentration. So here with this one, the combined weight of Microsoft, Apple, and NVIDIA will likely force a rebalance this Friday. We've been talking about this for a while. There's limits on it. There's the XLK. Your thoughts?
Well, you mentioned, XLK. It's a huge ETF. I think it has more than 70 billion as of the last check. And obviously that's going to cause a big change on the rebalance. But remember, Bob, this is not, for a PM to make that decision about whether to get long or reduce their exposure to NVIDIA. These are the index rules driving that. And what we're seeing, though, is that NVIDIA, it's not just about the XLK. Obviously, the performance of NVIDIA is impacting ETFs and benchmarks really across the spectrum. And certainly, as these indexes begin to rebalance, we're going to see that kind of ripple through the, the ETF industry.
It's important to know most of these rebalancing don't matter at all. They don't have any impact, but there is an unusual situation here with NVIDIA. It's gone up so much. These ETFs, those of you who don't know, these particular ones are rebalanced on a quarterly basis. So right now, NVIDIA is 6% of the XLK. Well, NVIDIA is a lot more of the S&P 500 now in the last quarter because the price has gone up so much. So what's happened is the XLK is underperforming the S&P 500 because NVIDIA has a smaller weighting than in the S&P. It's going to rebalance this Friday. That'll be corrected. But in the meantime, there's been quite a performance difference between the XLK, which is the supposedly representing the S&P 500 tech, and the S&P 500 tech itself, because of the fact that it's got a smaller weighting. So what's going to happen here essentially is they're going to have to, there's a limit here. You can't be more than 22.5% of the weighting in any individual stock. Put up that again, if you can, the weighting here. And the combined weight of all the stocks those over 4.5%, I think, can't exceed 50%. So here you add these numbers up here with the top four here, and what's going to happen is they're going to buy NVIDIA and increase the weighting of NVIDIA, and they're going to likely decrease the weighting of Apple and possibly Microsoft here. So that's what seems to be going to happen.
Again, driven by the index rules, and there's these diversification rules built into many indexes, but it's again very important where the S&P 500 is a market cap weighted index, and by default so is XLK being a piece of that. But certainly there are many indexes out there that have different rebalance frequencies and different ways that they actually re-weight the index. It could be by a factor like dividends, or by momentum or growth, etc. So very important for investors to really understand how they're positioned and how those index rules work.
And again, most of the time this doesn't matter. This is a fairly rare situation where you actually have some significant movement in the ETF, but this is why we're here, to let you know about this. Elsewhere, you are providing the servicing and the custody for the majority of the pending spot Ethereum ETFs, as well as the spot Bitcoin ETFs. They're scheduled to go public sometime maybe this summer. Can you tell us anything about the timing?
Yeah, certainly. Look, these ETFs have been really the story of the year. On spot Ethereum ETFs, we're in a wait and see mode, just really like the rest of the market. So we'll kind of see what happens on timing. Certainly we've seen some comments come back from the SEC across all of the issuers. That is a step forward, but again, no explicit timing really has come forth yet. And as you said, we are providing the infrastructure to the many of the Bitcoin ETFs, and we're going to do the same and planning to do the same.
You're the custodian for a lot of them, right?
Yeah, we're providing the asset servicing for many of the digital asset ETF products, and that's a range of services from accounting, administration, and again, those fund services are a piece of what we offer to the ETF issuers.
Great.